In the idea that readers, by voting en masse on which stories and events are most interesting or important, have become a kind of collective editorial force. Mass use of information has a dramatic and lasting effect on all news media, as millions of readers are helping to decide how journalism will be produced, organized, and disseminated. This fundamentally changes one's view of media distribution and audience aggregation. We've moved from a mindset that is mostly centered on people coming to a media destination to one that seizes the opportunities of the global distributed network that is the internet. You heard people talking about that a little while ago. This was critical for us to understand because fewer than 60% of the inbound links to nytimes.com come from users who type our URL into a browser or link from a bookmark. The rest come from the distributed internet, and a third of those from Google alone. To state the obvious, Google has become a vast content distribution system, a massive editorial filter. Traditional news organizations can tap into the wisdom of crowds by creating new ways for news content to surface on their home pages. At the Times, one of the most popular forms of authority is our most emailed list. So, the story. Back in June of 2006, the New York Times published a story by Amy Sutherland entitled, "What Shum Taught Me About a Happy Marriage." The story was buried somewhere deep in the paper, certainly nowhere near page 1 or on our homepage. In brief, the story is about a woman's attempt to change unpleasant aspects of her husband's behavior using animal training techniques. Think about the gay dog? I'm not sure. Within hours, the story quickly shot to the top of the most emailed list and stayed there for weeks. This fun story, based solely on the fact that thousands of our readers were emailing it around, began appearing on our homepage day after day, attaining a long tail that would have been impossible just a few short years earlier. But the story doesn't end there. On January 10th, 2007, the Times published a list of most emailed articles for the year. And right at the top of the list, 2007, was the Shamu piece. Yet again, it was catapulted into the most emailed article list, given a new lease on life based on its popularity 6 months earlier. The day before the list was published, the article generated 511 page views. 2 days after it was published, that article generated 95,000 page views. And that week, Shamu generated over 600,000 page views, a testament to how alternate taxonomies and an understanding of the wisdom of crowds can drive enormous interest in even the most obscure news story. More recently, Tara Parker Pope's health blog posts about anorexia and eating disorders received an avalanche of visits and comments. Her articles about health and food have been propelled around the web by our most emailed list, as have the columns of many of our op-ed page writers, columnists, and lead stories about the economy and the presidential campaign. And now we will be syndicating our content even further by making the code for our most emailed list available to developers via an API. In this way, our journalism spreads across the internet and therefore around the world. We've long been early innovators. We have pioneered, as you heard, an RSS, allowing users from across the web to remix our content for their own needs. As a result, the Times was the most blogged news source in the world last year, with countless bloggers using our content as fodder for conversations and millions of readers coming to us that way. This is the inherent paradox of the hyperlinked news organization. It can get much larger and have much more impact through its disintegration. And my fifth observation is that the web, by transforming the narrative, is providing a new mechanism for harnessing the collective intelligence, ability, and spirit of the smartest and most talented people on our planet. When this happens, we all benefit because this creates the necessary condition for scientific breakthrough, economic development, and a general rise in the standard of living. This happened throughout the Industrial Revolution when relatively high-paying jobs lured people into cities across Western Europe and the United States later. This fueled creativity and innovation, which in turn generated a massive increase in wealth. This is a timeless phenomenon. It even happened to ancient Sumer. As Alec Wright, Time staff writer, wrote in But, Mastering Information Throughout the Ages. In 5000 BC, and now I'm quoting, the people of Uruk, that's how you pronounce U-R-U-K. I had to learn that. Having mastered a few basic agricultural techniques, had started to settle in a growing population center with a flourishing trade and increasingly specialized classes of workers, farmers, merchants, builders, and ruling class of the elite citizens. It was the world's first boomtown. The sheer concentration of people created a cauldron of technological innovations. During this period, ancient Sumerians invented the wheel, sailing ships, molded bricks, and architectural breakthroughs like vaults and domes. And with far greater access to information and the emergence of new modes of cooperation and collaboration, the inventors and innovators of the 21st century will be even more productive, and we will all benefit accordingly. All this interconnectedness begets more interconnectedness, and this requires developing a far more organic relationship with our readers, which is my sixth observation. We are quickly seeing the emergence of a wide variety of internet-enabled content delivery devices, including Kindles, smartphones, netbooks, IPTVs, and of course, garden variety PCs and mobile phones, all of which are networked together. In the old days, say the 20th century, people talked about convergence as if we would have one multi-purpose device on which we did everything: read news, watch videos, check email. Now we have a more complex view of convergence, one that puts the person at the center of the experience. We imagine a world where someone is reading a story on nytimes.com and gets up to go. Their phone knows that they've left their desk, and they immediately receive a text message linking them to the story that they were just reading. When they get into their car, the story is automatically read to them. And when they get home, they continue with the story in multimedia format on the flat screen TV in their living room. We call this intelligent content delivery, and we're retooling our newsroom, our content creation factory, if you will, so that we can deliver on that vision, one in which content converges around the individual. We actually brought this vision to the future to life when individuals from our research and development department, which we created in 2006, by the way, a first in our industry, developed a new application called ShiftD, a Hack Day award winner. It provides users with the capability to seamlessly shift content between their computers and mobile devices. ShiftD eliminates the need to separately save certain information on both a computer and a mobile device. Users can update information from any web browser by text message from a mobile phone to a mobile web browser or by using a downloadable application on Adobe Air. As everyone here knows, having exponentially enhanced access to everything is providing an opportunity to become engaged and empowered in all parts of our lives, and this is why the internet and emerging media will carve an even more central place for themselves in our lives in the years to come. This is also why it's important for traditional companies to adopt strategies that enable us to be of the internet, not merely on the internet. This requires us to find business models that work online and to address audiences in ways that are fundamentally different than analog media. This is a useful abstraction, but not so easy to implement. The internet, in anything resembling real time, is still a relatively new industry, and most of us are still trying to determine how we create a business model that will provide sustainable growth. The online marketplace is a particularly intriguing challenge because there is such substantial dispute about the underlying economic and market principles that should guide us. What increases the degree of difficulty is that the web consumers have grown accustomed to getting much of what they want for free. At the New York Times Company, we have a three-part financial strategy to to attract more users, to deepen their engagement, and to earn additional revenue from their usage. Again, relatively straightforward, but we have an array of innovative tactics to make it work. Our most successful tactic is creating sustainable leadership positions in verticals, those sections where advertisers believe they have the best opportunity to speak to their prime customers. Our focus on verticals is a very important way in which we are differentiating ourselves from many of our traditional newspaper players. And we've been working on the development and implementation of that vertical strategy over the past decade, and that continues. Emphasizing integration of content and tools in our news operations, such as we've done in our verticals, is critical. So, too, is integration of mediums, and most important of all, full integration of readers into our dialogue. We must not only engage our audiences with our own work, structuring a two-way conversation, but in the lives and interests of each other, thereby assembling a forum. This thinking is certainly integral to the development of such online products as Times People, Times Machine, and Times Open. Each speaks to our desire to entice our readers to come to us for more than our great news and information. We want them to create and join communities that care deeply about the range of topics, from the practical to the esoteric to the entertaining. Most recently, we've been working on Times Extra, a new service for nytimes.com's homepage, complementing Times content with news headlines from all over the web, generating headlines from other news organizations and blogs, and pairing them with relevant front-page Times articles. The headlines are aggregated using BlogRunner, a tool we acquired several years ago, which generates feeds that are then improved using human judgment. From BlogRunner's automated feed, New York Times writers and editors select the best sources for Times Extra. In turn, BlogRunner learns from this expert input. Referencing relevant content to these respected sources, our readers can use nytimes.com as a gateway to news and information guided by the editorial authority of the Times. As Times reporter Brian Stetler recently noted in an article earlier this month, "Thou shalt not link to outside sites. A long-held commandment of many newsrooms is eroding." Embracing the hyperlink ethos of the web to a degree not seen before, news organizations are becoming more comfortable linking to competitors, acting in effect like aggregators. Fundamentally, we are addressing a common desire for comprehensiveness, the desire of people to find the news and information that they want from their most trusted sources. The era of the walled garden is over. Initiatives such as Times Extra and our other news products will enable the New York Times to do an even better job of responding to our audience's demands for interactivity, community, multimedia, and news and information in an increasingly wide range of topics. In these initiatives, we remain dedicated to disseminating high-quality content but in such projects, the New York Times is also forging a new, dynamic, and most exciting future for itself. But this introduces my final observation. Constant self-evaluation and adaptation are absolute givens as we enter a new decade. There must be an institutional commitment to engage in reinvention, especially as the information revolution picks up steam and online consumers become more sophisticated and more demanding. There are plenty of business books that have detailed exhaustively how companies have responded or failed to respond to the fundamental challenges posed by change. The authors of these treatises have concluded that many companies have failed for lack of the institutional ability to move beyond their basic value proposition. In some cases, the senior management didn't recognize the degree of change necessary to survive or to thrive. And this brings me to one of my favorite quotes from Brand Farron, the former executive vice president of creative technology and R&D for Walt Disney Imagineering. Now, a number of years ago, he explained why it's so difficult to get your footing in an era that has been buffeted by one technological breakthrough after another. Here's what he said. Trying to assess the true importance of the net now is like asking the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk if they were aware of the potential of American airline AAdvantage miles. We're always very bad at predicting how a given technology will be used and for what reasons. Society evolves like the species. It's not smooth and linear. You'll have something like the internet revolution. It comes, industrial revolution. It comes like a jolt, and then you kind of dig around for the next 50 years getting used to it. That was a quote. All this said, the New York Times Company spends a lot of time thinking about 2010 and 2015 and anticipating future developments, and that's becoming an incredibly important function for all of us. Our R&D group helps us to anticipate consumer preferences, devise ways of satisfying them, and develop products across the company. It now includes 16 people with such positions as creative technologist, data miner, business catalyst, and director of emerging platforms. We even have a futurist. One particular initiative within our R&D group that is encouraging individual innovation is our Tech Challenge. We are providing developers and product managers with an opportunity to turn their particular visions into something very tangible and hopefully profitable. Last year's winners produced Times Widgets, a tool that allows our readers to create their own widgets and gadgets from the numerous RSS feeds on nytimes.com, and A Night on the Town, a great new way to check on what is happening around New York City and then create a personalized itinerary. Both will be rolled out in the coming months. Building on this success, this year's Tech Challenge has resulted in some very interesting submissions that should generate another round of useful online products. Two other good examples of this kind of innovation and collaboration are our new relationships with Facebook and LinkedIn, important alliances which bolster our presence within two very popular social networking sites and are bringing to us new readers. When you gather together all these observations into one continuous narrative, I hope you can see that survival and, dare I say, prosperity in this period will require that organizations, whether they're private, public, not-for-profit, that they be committed to regularly enhancing their ability to deal effectively with uncertainty. Constant contingency planning and crisis management have become the norm. One of the ways that we will effectively cope with all this craziness is by becoming even more proficient in how we utilize information. With increasing frequency, success and achievement is being measured by how well an organization makes use of its online tools. So how do we achieve sustained success on the internet? Future success on the internet is about dedicating ourselves to fundamental values while freeing ourselves to innovate and grow through constant rethinking and reformulation of practices and products. Future success on the internet is about leveraging the wisdom of crowds by shaping a more meaningful, community-oriented experience and by continuing to learn from the information revolution. And future success on the internet is about overcoming conventional thinking and maintaining thoughtful perspectives on our world, its events, and its possibilities. By doing all this and much, much more, we endure, we adapt, we innovate, and we advance into the 21st century with a renewed sense of purpose and of mission. Thank you.
Arthur's been kind enough to stick around and take some questions, so I'm going to ask him a few, and then Emily and some of what team is going to take questions from you, so we get them ready. I think you touched. I know something that's probably of great interest to a lot of our attendees here, and you touched on it quite a bit. Is that struggle between integrating and disintegrating, which was so well put. To go back a couple of years, there was people call it the paywall. I think the official was Time Select, where Times had there was a certain amount of content that was accessible, and the rest you had to pay for or be subscribed to, etc. And then at one point, totally changed courses, took it down and went away. Can you give us some, which I think people were obviously thrilled by, but at the same time I think everybody could sort of understood why you were doing that in the first place in some senses. What was the change that happened that made you to do that?
That's a good question. Well, okay, so we began Time Select in 2004, and that put all of our op-ed page columnists behind a paid wall, many of our other columnists in the newspaper, as well as other elements of the paper, such as our archives. I remember calling the op-ed columnists and telling them we were going to do this, and not always easy conversations. Tom Friedman was interesting. He said, "Arthur, I hate it, but you've got to try it." And so we did, and in 2007 we took it down. And in those 3 years, the internet changed so dramatically, and we had to adapt to those changes. Online news and information became unambiguously commoditized. Search became a titanic influence in, and we know, as we all know today. And by keeping our most distinguished voices, such as those of Tom Friedman or Maureen Dowd or Frank Rich, behind that wall, we were hiding that part of our information, of our offerings, that was the least commoditizable. So we made $10 million a year off of this, by the way. It wasn't as though we lost money during that period of time. It was not unsuccessful. The problem became that the growth rate stalled very quickly. Everyone who was going to sign up did sign up, but there was little growth. And had the wall remained, we would not be seeing the growth that we see today in our numbers. We're up 40% so far, year to year, month to month. So it's part of this new philosophy of ours, which is yours, all of you. Test and learn, test and adapt.
So ultimately, it was a little bit of a leap of faith, but successful, financially even.
Financially successful, but we knew we could do better by freeing that content up, and indeed we have, and then monetizing that. And the same was true with our archives, and that was a great example of but the search was, with our archives now free out there, no paid wall, search has become a critical part of our growth.
I mean, I think it's also a huge service, honestly, how many decades of excellent reporting was done by the Times. It's now actually on the internet and available to people as opposed to not in the past. So the overall quality of information on the internet went up just because of that, which is...
Well, that's very kind, and you're obviously ignoring our story in the 1920s where we announced that, in fact, the canals on Mars were being built faster than we thought. True. May have been the 19-teens, but we did announce that canals were being built on Mars.
Which maybe gets us to another, I think, challenge for you and for many. How has the proliferation of less researched news, what some people would say lesser quality news, how has that affected the Times? How do you compete with that?
Well, we compete by keeping our brand promise.
Right. I mean, obviously the quality is better, which is a huge, but it takes so much more work and investment.
It does take more work and it does take more investment. But let's not pretend that, or let's acknowledge that some of the work that we are seeing done by bloggers and by digital news organizations is really excellent. It's not, some of it is horrifying, but some of it's superb. And Virginia Tech, the coverage of Virginia Tech that came out of the blog was absolutely remarkable. But we have to recognize that what am I going to try to say? That all news institutions are human enterprises. We will all make mistakes. Our challenge is not to pretend that's not true. It's to acknowledge the mistakes when we make them, to own up to them, and then to move past them with better journalism. And that's really at the heart of what a journalist is. Not infallible, but someone who recognizes that when a mistake is made, you have to own that mistake, you have to correct that mistake, and you have to get that correction out to people as quickly as you can.
which I think, touches on this also, is is the way that you're evaluating the journalist into doing things well, doing things not as well, has that changed? I mean, a number of media companies now online are actually paying their bloggers, reporters, journalists based on how many people read their stories, which, in some sense is basically saying if a lot of people read it, you did a good job.
Right.
Is
and that is
something
not
that
the way we're going to be going. At About.com, where that page views and unique users are part of the compensation for our guides. Not the whole compensation, but it's part of it. At the Times, that's not going to be the case, because quite frankly, a Supreme Court reporter isn't worse than a restaurant reviewer. And a restaurant reviewer is going to get more pages, more unique users. That's just the way it is in the world. And we don't want to set our journalists in that mode. Okay, having said that, are we finding ways of compensating those journalists who are helping us build verticals, in deep verticals, in different ways, something tied not to any single measure, for example, not to advertising dollars. We don't want to do that. But say to the kinds of measures of usage that we're talking about engagement. Sure, we are looking at how to do that in such things as DealBook. And that may be something that comes from that. But that's really about creating a site, not just being a writer.
Right. What do you think about other organizations that are doing that?
I'm not going to judge other organizations on that. We'll let everyone decide how to run their businesses.
Fair enough. So I have one more question before we should take some audience questions. What is the New York Times going to look like in 10 years? Am I still going to be able to get it delivered to my door? Is it still going to be on a piece of paper?
Well, first of all, do you get it delivered to your door now?
On the weekends.
On the weekend? We should talk. I'll take that. Okay, so will there be a print New York Times in another decade? Let's start with the fact that the heart of the answer must be we can't care. We do care. I care very much. But we must be where people want us for our information. That's the thought of cannibalizing yourself before somebody else cannibalizes you. So that's the one answer. But in truth, we have a rule after years of studies that if you are a home delivery subscriber to the New York Times for 2 years or more, there are 2 reasons you give it up. The first is you move to some place we can't serve. And the second is you move to some place we can't serve. If you get that. 3 years ago, that number was 650,000. 2 years or more home delivery subscribers. Today, that number is 820,000. Those are print. So print is going to be here, I believe, for a very long time. There was a wonderful story about in the 1850s, a New York publisher wrote in his own paper that he had just witnessed the death of newspapers. He wrote that literature would survive, but newspapers must fade away. 1850s. He had just met the telegraph. Okay, so television was going to kill newspapers, radio was going to kill newspapers, telegraph was going to kill newspapers. People adapt, and people like it in different ways. So I believe print will still be here, and we'll move you to 7-day a week.
You know what it is? It's a great campaign that you guys do on the weekends. You're sitting there, they come on, they say, don't you want to get the Times on the weekend? I was like, yeah, I guess I do. Let's take